Hello, I'm ABX Toycat, and welcome back to the second channel video. Today I have some more Geography of Toycat. It's everyone's favorite second channel series where I talk about the world and geography and stuff. And today I figured, because it's been about a couple of months since I last made a, 5 countries which might exist soon video, and a lot of people have asked me to make another one, because even though, again, countries have formed over a very long period of time, let me clarify this one right now. In the past 20 years, there's only been 3 new countries in the entire world. Countries form very, very slowly, but it is something that's happening over time. Generally speaking, since the days of the USSR, countries aren't coming together and kind of forming bigger countries. They're tending to split up and be more autonomous and be more separate, and as a result, you're going to see more and more countries happen over the next 50, 100 years. So let me just clarify, this is 5 countries that will exist soon in North America, the next continent we'll be covering, but they're not going to happen in the next 5 years. You're not going to read the paper tomorrow, probably, and see them that they're going to be there, but it is a sort of thing that we're going to slowly see a drift between them and the country they're a part of, and they're going to slowly just become independent, and it's going to be one of those things. So, I think these are 5 countries which are the most likely candidates for new countries in North America. I just want to get that all the way out of the way, because I don't want this to be misleading. These are countries which are currently part of other countries, but are slowly drifting away, and which will eventually become independent, in my opinion. So with that said, let's get straight into it. I think that's enough for, disclaimer for now. Let's start with the 2 ones which most people will say are very likely, but realistically aren't, because both Texas and California have relatively, mild movements in their heads of yep, we're just kind of independent and staying part of the union for the fun of it. Texas over here, California over here. Fun fact, California is the biggest state, Texas is the second biggest one, and it's kind of interesting that both these 2 big states therefore have, the first and second biggest secession movements. However, both states, even though they want to believe they can be separate from the union, actually they are tied in. One of the core parts of the United States is that every state is there by force. If they had the ability to leave, then they could do it over tiny disputes, and that's just not something that makes sense in the US. So, will Texas or California ever leave? One, they need to get all the people rallying behind them first, because there's no significant support right now. Then, they need to somehow work out a way to hold a referendum, and then secede unilaterally, which might lead to an invasion. And because they're both, literally in the US right now, and, they're part of the 48 contiguous states, it basically would create massive, massive problems, and there's just so many steps involved in independence that I don't see it ever happening, unless the US, crumbles for some reason at some point in the next 100 years, which is possible, but it makes it one of the less likely contenders, I guess. So, if that said, let's move into the more likely one to kind of prove a point here, which is Greenland. So, Greenland is a part of North America. I mean, you might not consider it to be one, because it's kind of separate by the Baffin Bay. But yeah, Greenland is a part of North America, and the really interesting thing about Greenland is that you might not know it, but it isn't an independent country already. A lot of people assume it is, because you look at a map and it says Greenland, it doesn't say Denmark Part 2, the Greenland Resurgence or whatever. But yeah, Greenland is actually an autonomous province in Denmark. So it used to just be part of Denmark, Kingdom of Denmark. It's Denmark, it's the Faroe Islands, which are right here next to the UK, by the way. And then there's Greenland. Greenland in 1979, I believe, they got home, had a big home rule referendum. The referendum was massively won by the people saying, yep, we want to rule ourselves. And basically now Denmark is just in control of their foreign affairs, their currency, and very little else. And even they're one of the biggest exceptions in the EU. And that even though Denmark is a part of the EU and Greenland is a part of Denmark, Greenland is not a part of the EU and really isn't even European, because it's in North America. The people that live there aren't even, part Danish. They're not European, they're not North American. They're Inuits, they're native people to the place, and it's also just a very tiny country. Less than 60,000 people live here. It's something like 56,000 people live in the entire landmass, and as a result of that, it's just so different to any other place in the world, and as a result, they are presumably going to go independent, especially when you've got to think that having, foreign protection doesn't really need to be so necessary when you're kind of located here, especially then, the currency thing, is that too big of a deal, versus the whole having a national sentiment and being a national country. Is that a big deal? That's something that we're going to see happening slowly, more in the future. Let's kind of put this in perspective here. You can see Greenland independence. It's something they want more and more. Someone have even suspected that, the year 2021, because that's an anniversary or something. Realistically, it's going to take some time to happen, because there's no massive benefits being independent, but they definitely are going to be heading in that direction more over the next 100 years. So Greenland is a country you could see existing, but I don't think it'd change the landscape of anything too much, unlike if we saw Quebec go independent. So if Quebec does go independent, which, as I mentioned in my Canada video, is seeming less likely, even though it seemed like it was a given 20 years ago, so I figured I'd mention it as one of those things that you might think will happen, but actually might not. So yeah, Quebec had actually had a referendum on independence in the 70s or 80s, and it actually was relatively, close. It was like 40-60, and they're like, okay, then, well, I guess that's dead for a generation. Then, about 15, 20 years later, they decided, let's go for round 2 of the referendum, and it's one of the closest referendums in the world on something this big. The Quebec referendum, as you can see right here, was 50.58% no versus 49.42% yes, with a turnout of 93%. That's 93% is like unheard of for democratic stuff like this. This is one of the biggest like referendums ever, and it was that close. It literally, the invalid votes would have won it either way, depending on how they went, kind of, which is kind of interesting if you ask me. But yeah, basically Quebec is one of those most interesting regions because they were so close to independence. Then they've kind of just taken a step back from it because popular support has gone the other way. However, Quebec is very distinct from the rest of Canada in that they speak French. It's distinct in that they actually make most of the maple syrup. The maple syrup stuff comes from here. And basically, I think there is a decent chance that at some point Quebec would go independent. If it does, then it's going to create a real mess in North America because we're going to have Canada, which is like surrounding Quebec, and then there'll also be the only French-speaking country in a while. It's going to make things a bit messy as far as the map stuff is concerned, but Quebec has aspirations of independence, even though it is going the other way right now. I think, again, it's one of those regions that is very culturally distant in a lot of ways, that you could see it eventually become independent, especially since they already had the, the kind of mandate to like push for independence if they need it. It's not like Catalonia in Spain, where even though everyone wants it, they can't get it. It is one of those places where as soon as the people want the independence, it looks like it can happen. So yeah, with that said, let's move on to the next place which might eventually become an independent country. And this is one that I guess a lot of you won't have heard of, because not many people look into Central America and the Nicaraguan stuff. But yeah, Nicaragua is a country located just over here between Costa Rica and Honduras and El Salvador. It's over here basically, just the south of Mexico and whatnot. And basically Nicaragua, I'm horrible at pronouncing this word. Nicaragua is a really interesting country because even though the vast majority of people have roughly similar, kind of roots from the whole Spanish invasion and then the people before that, basically the people on the coast are actually part of an autonomous region called the Mosquito Coast. So the Mosquito Coast, which is a really bizarre name for a province, basically is very distinctly, when you go back in the history, the rest of Central America was mainly Spanish, whereas the Mosquito Kingdom was backed by the British. So whenever you have a division like that, it kind of leads to some interesting places. But the thing that makes it more interesting is not only they're an autonomous region already, which, by the way, it stretches a little bit into Honduras. It's worth mentioning. Here's an actual map there. Yeah, and not only does it stretch a tiny bit into Honduras, so that's a little bit weird, and not only is it an autonomous province, which is... So yeah, it doesn't have current borders. It's not even entirely in Nicaragua. It has their own separate people. They're all made up of the Mosquito indigenous people, and they have, like, their own king and their own stuff like that. And whenever there's, like, big disputes internally, so the Contra situation where... Nicaragua and getting rid of their communist government, that was something backed by the Mosquito Kingdom, and basically, right now, they're an autonomous region. There's a big support in the region for independence, and at some point, that could happen. So, you might soon have a country in the world called Mosquito Coast, and I think that thing alone is the coolest, because, what do you call them, the mosquito people? It sounds like you're talking about giant mosquito people, and that alone is enough of a reason to be excited about Mosquito Coast independence. So, yeah, Mosquito Coast would be one of the smaller countries in Central America, and I guess North America in general, but it is one of those countries that might start existing, and in case you were forgotten what we're talking about, let's talk about somewhere everyone knows, which is Alaska. So I mentioned how US states are all bound together by the way the US works, and that is entirely true. However, if any state is going to leave, I would say the two most likely contenders are Hawaii and Alaska, by just geographic thing, because Hawaii really isn't connected to the rest of it, but again, they consider themselves to be American. Alaskans do too, but there is some significant support for being their independent thing, and the biggest reasons for this is, first of all, look at this state compared to every other part of America. One, it is bigger than any other state by size by just a humongous amount. It's not even comparable to any other US state. It's comparable to groups of 5 or 6 states. Plus, then you consider the fact that it's geographically remote. It's not actually directly connected to the United States. To get from the US to Alaska, you either take a plane, you take a boat, or if you're in certain parts of Alaska, you can drive through Canada, which isn't really being connected at all. That's just, that's just like a separate place that you're claiming as the US. Plus, then you can mind the fact that Alaskans have their own native people. They have their own basically, they're an entirely distinct place in terms of the climate, which means that the kind of culture is different. If you consider the fact that by representation in the US, they're just entirely... I don't want to say shafted because it is the way the rules work, but, there is a 435-person Congress in America. 1 seat goes to Alaska. That's the minimum a state has to have. They wouldn't even get that if the population rules went a bit funnier. And the reason that that's significant is because if you look at, New York, for instance. So New York is the biggest city, so obviously it has a lot of Congress people and stuff. stuff, but just Brooklyn, just one small part of one city in one state, has 3 separate congressmen, to Alaska's, which is this whole place here, having 1. Alaska is the biggest congressional district in the world, I believe, by most estimates, which means that, yeah, this entire place, these 2,900 islands, plus, all these cities, from like Barrow up here, which is just a little separate place, to Anchorage, this giant city, all represented by one person. A little bit weird is what I'm saying, and then you combine that with the fact that they're separate, so it's not too hard to defend themselves. And you combine that with the fact that obviously they're kind of close to other countries, and if there's going to be a significant, if there's going to be one place that could secede, it'd be Alaska. But what about the support? So I mentioned how there was some support in 1996. There actually was, their governor elections was actually won by the Alaskan Independence Party. Obviously, the party's kind of drifted off a bit since then, but there was support at one point, and the support is there at some point, and they're the most likely state to be able to secede, and I think they're the one that people would be like, oh yeah, I guess that makes sense that they left. It wouldn't destroy the US to let them leave, and there's support there, so you could see Alaska going independent. It's probably the least likely event here, because again, just if you look at every other place here, you say, well, I mean, you don't really want to, but it is something that I think if any state is going first, Alaska's going to be that state, and that's the point I'm trying to raise here. So yeah, 5 countries which could soon exist in America, not California or Texas, as much as they like to believe. Greenland, the Mosquito Coast, Quebec, the French Canada, if you will, and also Alaska. So I hope you did all enjoy this video. I've noticed that the common trend amongst the ones that are actually seceding is being like really far north. Suspicious, eh? I guess this is North America. But yeah, with that said, hope you did all enjoy this video. If you did like it, then it's the second channel. I don't care. Thank you all very much for watching, and goodbye. That's a solid outro. Oh yeah, second channel, don't care.